Her mother locked her up until she was 8 years old in a closet. When the authorities take them out, they do not stop screaming when they see this. The trial was covered by the entire national press. The case of a girl locked for 8 years in a closet by her mother shocked the country. For weeks, the media did nothing but talk about the case of little Lily.
Also, if you have not done so already, please subscribe to our channel and click that notification bell to get inspired by these real-life stories every day. Now, back to the story.
This was also the main topic of conversation of everyone in the streets, regardless of profession, age, or social class. Everyone agreed in condemning that abominable case. And although national legislation did not contemplate capital punishment, public opinion demanded death for the woman who was capable of doing such a thing to her own daughter. The authorities, however, were cautious. They were the ones who discovered the dantesque image of an 8-year-old girl tied to a bed in a closet. But preliminary investigations began to show that things were not as they seemed, and that the person everyone pointed to as the villain might actually be the heroine of the whole story. However, they refrained from making any statements on the matter because tempers were high, and it was better not to add fuel to the fire and wait for the investigations to culminate. The key to the whole thing was Rubiella, little Lily's mother, the woman who tied her daughter to a bed for 8 years. But Rubiella had been able to contribute little or nothing to the investigation so far because since the authorities discovered everything and captured her, the woman plunged into a nervous breakdown that had her under psychological surveillance. She had lost her voice, and every time they put a paper and pencil in front of her to express herself, the only thing Rubiella wrote was to ask them to please let her see her daughter. By order of the prosecutor's office, mother and daughter were to remain isolated because of the danger that seeing each other again could pose for the girl. As if that were not enough, Lily's situation was not the best either. She hadn't been able to provide relevant information that would contribute to the investigation. After a whole life in the closet, the little 8-year-old girl was barely a shadow of what a girl of her age should be. In fact, her image was so shocking that some police officers didn't stop screaming when they discovered her. The little girl, who was barely moving from the closet to the bathroom, had atrophied muscles and bones in her arms and legs, and her skin was extremely sensitive to sunlight, so they had to blindfold her to remove her from the closet and take her to a hospital where she would be treated. Initially, the doctors who saw her after learning the story of the conditions in which she was found assumed that the child would not be able to understand any language either, that her hearing would not identify sounds, and that her throat was not trained to make them, much less that Lily would be able to read or write. However, to everyone's surprise, it wasn't long before the child began to speak. Her voice was weak and hard to make out, but her words were always the same. "Mommy, is that you, Mommy? Where's my mommy?" For the doctors, it was evident that the child was addressing the absent mother with love, and that Rubiella could not be as bad as the situation made it seem. But the tabloids were delighted to have a splashy headline about a story of abuse by a wicked mother, so they ignored that detail and set out to create popular indignation against Rubiella, and they succeeded. The day of the trial arrived and the whole country was expectant. The press transmitted the news minute by minute. The first thing that was known was that little Lily would not be present in court. After 8 years living isolated from civilization without leaving a room and having contact only with her mother, the physical and psychological impact was far too great, and she was far from recovery. Rubiella, the mother, was not doing well either, but because she was an adult and because of all the expectation that the case had generated, she was not exonerated of her responsibility and the trial went ahead. The authorities assumed that the trial would only be a television show, but that following the initial protocol, the judge would order its postponement because the conditions were not right for it to take place. And for the first few minutes, it seemed that this was indeed what would happen. But when the floor was given to Rubiella as a mere routine gesture, the woman surprised everyone by recovering her voice and giving her version of the facts. In a scenario as dark as that of an 8-year-old girl who had spent her whole life locked in a closet, only her mother, the author of that confinement, was able to shed the light that allowed them to understand everything. Rubiella said that since her infancy and early youth, she was a happy woman, lonely and without many economic comforts, but happy. Everything in her life fell apart when she met Manuel, a young man who at first was kind and respectful, but who turned out to be an obsessive, jealous man who destroyed her life. Manuel was a man with a lot of money. He'd inherited a large fortune and didn't need to work because he could take everything he needed from the unlimited money he had in his bank account. Thanks to his money and physical appearance, Manuel made of himself a great charmer, an image with which he was able to seduce countless victims, including Rubiella. After a couple of months of dating, Manuel offered Rubiella a perfect life by his side in another city. She accepted, but it was all a trap. When they arrived at their destination, Manuel locked Rubiela in a room from which she was not allowed to leave. A soundproof room where no matter how much she screamed, she could not be heard. Rubiela was locked up and he visited her occasionally to satisfy himself with her. It was during one of these visits that Rubiela became pregnant. From then on, a maternal instinct developed in her, giving her a strength she had never known before. She promised herself that she would defend the baby's life no matter what, and to prevent Manuel from forcing her to have an abortion or to give away her baby once it was born, she threatened to commit suicide. Manuel ended up accepting that Rubiela would give birth and keep the baby, but with a condition that wherever he went, the girl would be hidden, and that was how Lily ended up living inside the closet of the room, a small and dark place where the mother improvised a bed for her. Rubiela continued to receive the one-person food rations and had to make do so that she and her baby could survive on them. She taught her little girl to speak and even write, but no matter how hard she tried, it was impossible to make Lily a normal child. With no interaction with other humans and locked in a closet, Lily grew up with a withdrawn body and mind and began to have nervous breakdowns that caused her to scream and shake her body violently. To prevent one of these crises from taking place during Manuel's visits, and he wanted to take it out on the girl, Rubiela was forced to tie her up inside the closet. This was the horrible scenario that the police officers encountered when they arrived in that room, and which made more than one of them scream. The neighborhood grocery store where Manuel did his shopping had been suspecting for years that something strange was going on, because the man would buy a whole lot of food, enough for a whole month, but he would only be there for a couple of days and then disappear for weeks at a time. During that time, no one else would enter the house. At first, she did nothing, feeling that she was meddling in other people's business, but one day a hunch prompted her to call the police, who after several days of processing a search warrant entered the house, then the bedroom, and finally the closet. This version given by Rubiela explained perfectly all of the other clues that had been gradually found by the authorities, and the woman was released and allowed to be reunited with her daughter. Both received psychological help in order to reintegrate into society in a process that turned out to be quite slow and difficult. Unfortunately, the police were never able to find Manuel's whereabouts. It was even suspected that this was not his real name, and Rubiela was not the only woman victim of his perverse schemes. If you liked the video, don't forget to like it and leave your opinion in the comments below. Subscribe for more stories like this one and share with your friends. Until next time.
If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up and consider sharing it with someone who may find it interesting. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.